We're back again with JC, who is joining us. And this evening, we're going to be looking at a Bible study for why, tell him, JC, why does God make us suffer?
Why does he allow it? Why do we have to have it? We're going to go over a lot that has to do with the ever important topic of suffering from all angles. So it's not really just, well, why does God allow suffering? It's like we're going to go over all of the kinds of suffering, all the actual for causes of it. We're going to try to do a very complete answer to the questions that usually surround it. All right.
Okay. Awesome.
We're also going to go over a lot of the what's actually the best way to say this. We're also going to talk about a lot of the things that even cause this to be an issue. We're going to go over how we should handle it. We're going to go over how it could be a good thing for certain situations. And I'm going to talk somewhat about some parts of the Bible, Old and New Testament. Not a huge amount, because I don't want to deviate too much from my outline, but there are certain things I do want to say about other areas that I do think can help sort of bring the whole thing together better. So that way we can get a more complete picture. But, there's a lot to talk about. I have my outline set up the way I pretty much want it now, which was actually not the case for Friday night. As I found out when I was reading it, I was like, oh my gosh, this must have been like just when I finished, and I never actually went back to sort of like clean it up. So even as I was reading it, I was at times I had to figure out what I was trying to say. I was like, okay, why did I put that? And why did I say it like that? And then I think about, okay, now I know. So I had to go and retype it up. So anyway, we got a lot to do. My 3 kids seem to be asleep. Ashley's not screaming my name, so let's get to it. And hopefully I can get through like 20-something pages before any of that happens.
Yeah. All right, let's go.
So anyway, without further ado, let us talk about and go over the important topic of suffering, because it is something that plagues this world and has plagued this world for almost its entire existence. So I want to start with the book of Revelation, actually, briefly, because eventually we will finish that study. I have like 160 pages left to do, but here's why, though. Because even though the main reason why that book was, in fact, written was to show the revealing of Christ as the king from being a high priest, and it shows the transition, it shows how it happened. But it was also written to people who were going to suffer, because from basically chapter 4 on is when the suffering on earth begins to get more intense and people are going to suffer. All right, including a lot of the saints that are down here during that time. Many of them are going to suffer tremendous persecution and be executed for their faith. So it was written for suffering, but it wasn't written to just tell you about suffering. It was written to prepare people for who might be here during that time that do believe, or who come to the Lord after that time begins. But it also is to inspire hope. And it's so interesting because depending on where in this world you live, the book of Revelation can either do one thing: make you fear it, or make you be fascinated by it. And those that are fascinated by it are typically the Christians that are in the Eastern world. The ones who are suffering the most find this book to be the most hopeful, and they love it because it tells them if they endure and overcome, which are 2 of the main themes of the book, what they suffered will be worth it.
Yes.
To whereas people in the West tend to fear it because they think it's just an angry God that's pouring out judgment upon the world. And to a certain extent it is, but there's so much more to it than just that. Yeah. So basically the Western world fears this book while the Eastern world adores this book. And they adore it because the Christians in the Eastern world are suffering far more than those of us in the Western world. Listen, while I see the persecution increasing here, not many Christians in this part of the world have to worry about going to church and being slaughtered by some group that doesn't like them every single week.
Yeah.
Right? Not many Christians in this part of the world have to worry about a terrorist group rounding them up, blindfolding them, and executing them live on the internet.
Yeah.
The Christians in the Eastern world, this is their reality every day. But it's like I always say, especially, for like us here, when that Constitution no longer protects your right to worship, we're going to find out who the true believers in Christ are.
And that's coming.
and that's the whole thing. What we're seeing in the Eastern world is a preview of what's coming to the Western world. The tolerance for our faith is at an all-time low, and it's only getting worse and worse. As the world descends further into chaos because they're getting away from the very principles that would make this world great, the tolerance for our faith is getting worse and worse. And I will explain that too a little bit later on. So anyway, that's why I want to talk about the book of Revelation. Now, you cannot talk about suffering unless you talk about Job. Job is, listen, like, we have to talk about Job. All right. Yeah. I'm not going to go too much into my outline for a future Job study, but I love the book of Job. Job is an amazing book in so many ways, but here's the thing. Job was a righteous person. He was a blameless man. And here, when you have God, when he specifically talks about you, mentions you in a positive way, you're on the high end of the totem pole. You're not like me at the very bottom. Like, you are on the top.
For me.
Yeah, because you aren't like us. You're at the top there. But very interesting what Satan said to God, because we all know the story. God was having this meeting with the angels, which Satan was among them, because I think people tend to forget Lucifer was an angel. He wasn't always this dark, evil demon. In fact, I don't think he looks anything like we depict him to look, because he was a beautiful creation.
Yeah.
And not only that, the Bible even says he presents himself as an angel of light. Because nobody would follow a tail and horns and a red fire-breathing, evil-looking entity. Nobody. Well, I shouldn't say nobody, because a lot of people follow those images right now. But for the most part, it's fiction they're following. If they saw the real thing like that, I think they'd change their opinion very quickly here. But he even said to God, Job, of course Job loves you. You have a hedge of protection around him. Yeah. Now, here's what's so funny. I have read Job dozens of times, and only recently did I pick up on that phrase Satan said. Oh. Have you not put a hedge around him? Because the Psalms I believe it's the Psalms talk about God having angels put a hedge of protection around either people or a nation. So it's true. Yes. God does actually put a hedge of protection around people. So, we all know the story. Then Satan goes, take it away, and he'll curse you. And so God said, okay, fine. You can do whatever you want to him, just don't touch him. Satan did, and Job did not curse God. He did not turn on him. No. They have another meeting, and he says, well, you only took away his stuff, but man, you let me touch him. Yeah. Exactly. And he will end his relationship with you. And so he did. And so basically we know what happened to Job. Satan destroyed this man's life. His friends turned on him. He had some young kid lecturing him about how bad he was, who knew nothing himself. Yeah. But to me, this is one of the worst things that happened to him. His wife even kind of turned on him. Now, the two primary reasons why God wanted us to get married was A, to be fruitful, so we could populate the earth, but also so you'd never go through life alone, that even when the world turned on you, you'd have somebody with you. Yeah. And Job lost that. He really lost everything.
Lost all. Yes.
But yeah. And here's the thing, though. He kept saying, if God would just listen to me, I could plead my case, and he would see this as wrong, and he would restore me. And God went silent on him, as a lot of people often feel during times of suffering. God has gone silent on them. And then when God did respond to him, it was a very different response than Job was expecting. Job was expecting God to be like, come here, I'll wrap you in my arms, I'll make this right, you'll be fine, we'll be good, and you'll be off to having a great life again. And that's not what God said. In fact, God turned to him and said, well, who are you to question me? Mm-hmm.
That's
Where
right.
were you when I created this and that, Job? Does the lightning come to you and ask, where should I strike? Think about that next time you see a lightning bolt strike.
Mhm.
Do the waves not obey me and stop where I tell them to? If you want to see something really cool, Google where the Gulf of Mexico meets the mighty Mississippi River, and you will see a line form where freshwater meets saltwater, and they never mix.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
If you want to see something else really cool, look where the Atlantic meets the Pacific and where the Atlantic meets the Indian Ocean. It's really neat because you can tell where one ocean stops and one begins. Now, I happen to know the scientific reasons behind this, and I'm not going to get into it because that will make me sound nerdy, and I'm not a nerd. I just happen to know these things because if I'm ever on Jeopardy, I want to do well. But there's another reason why I learn a lot of knowledge that most people would consider useless. I'm just going to share this real quick because nothing makes people leave you alone faster when you start teaching them things they have no interest in. If you want to get someone to leave you alone, you start telling them why the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean never mix. And believe me, if they're bothering you, they will stop.
Have a good day.
So, anyway, that's pretty cool. So, when God responded to Job, it was not what he thought. And then the most amazing thing happened, which we're going to touch on later on throughout this Bible study, was Job no longer needed to know why he suffered because he trusted God that it was the right thing. And he even said, the Lord giveth, the Lord take away, but he didn't even need to know the reason why. In fact, what makes Job's story, to me, it makes it so incredible, is as far as we know, while he was on earth, he was never told why he suffered. He was never told about the gamble or like the bet that God took from Satan.
Yeah.
He was never told about it.
Yeah. Don't tell us. Do it.
No. And so he didn't need to know. So, that's what makes Job's story so important to the whole issue of suffering, because this man suffered greatly, but this man grew closer to God because of his suffering. And we're going to talk about that too. So,
Yeah.
now let us get into the other part of my outline that here's where we start to really dive into the meat of this. Now we have a good intro, a good preamble, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Now let's get into this. So, have you ever really noticed how most of the people have an issue with the world's suffering, don't even believe in God to begin with?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Have you ever noticed that? It's mostly atheists that question and insult us and mock us, yet they don't even believe in God. And I
Yeah.
often say to them, what do you care? You don't believe in God.
That's
Well,
right.
how come you do if there's all this suffering? And we're going to talk about that later on.
Yeah.
But I mean, you never hear about like Muslims question it. I've never seen a video since 9/11, because since 9/11/01, the Muslim world's been a very important area for everyone to know about. All right. I've never, through all the suicide bombings, through all the rocket attacks, through all the brutal killings, never seen Muslim men and women cry out to Allah, why is there suffering? You don't hear it in India either.
Just embrace.
Right? You only hear about it, believe it or not, from atheists and even a lot of Christians.
Yeah.
Question it. Never hear about it. And there are some reasons why. We're going to go over some of those reasons too. Probably for the Muslim world, it's because they think Allah is telling them to do this anyway, so they just kind of accept it. But for everyone else, there are some other reasons. Now, here's the thing: the question about suffering. Of all the questions that I am asked, this is actually the one I tend to struggle with a lot. Not because I don't have answers, but not because I haven't even talked about it, but it's actually because I myself have not suffered the way other people have and the way other people do. I have endured troubled waters like everyone else,
Mm-hmm.
but as I think about it, I have never truly gone through a period of my life where I suffered greatly. Ever.
Yeah.
So, believe me, with all the sins that I am guilty of and all the things that I have done throughout my life, if anyone in this world deserved to suffer because of it, it is me. And probably a lot of people would say that. But I have not. And I'm very grateful for that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't take that for granted. Even when I screw up, I still very praise God and glorify Him for everything that I have experienced and how minimal my life has actually endured any type of suffering.
Mhm.
But the issue and the topic of suffering cannot be put off. Eventually, all of us will suffer at some point. However, when it comes to suffering, there's something else that is very noticeable. Usually, it's older people that tend to think the most about it and worry about it. Younger people tend not to really think about anything that has to do with hardships, unless, of course, they specifically experience something. But all in all, when you're younger, you do think you're invincible. And for the most part, you pretty much are, because when you fall down, you stand right back up. When you get sick, you still carry on as if you were not sick. Then
Yeah,
when you reach
you
your
hit your
40s, when you
fall down. Yeah, that's not so fun.
then when you reach your 40s, you end up going into rehab for playing with your kids because your shoulder locks up. It's weird. Like I had to do.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, it's
yeah.
crazy. And when you're, chasing your kids around the yard, after about 2 minutes, you're huffing and puffing like you're about to have a heart attack, even though you're not in bad shape. It's weird, It's crazy when you get to your 40s, and then beyond.
Yeah.
So, as I said, we're all gonna endure some type of suffering at some point, but we can make it worse by handling it the wrong way. And while some people seem to suffer more than others, and they seem to suffer one thing after another without getting any type of break.
Mhm.
Remember this: when you are suffering, there are still things in your life that are going the way you need them to, and you may not even realize it. Like, for example, when you get sick, most of your body still functions correctly.
Yes.
You can be grateful for that.
Yeah.
Um, Even if you're having a hard time at work or something, or like your car breaks down, there's still a lot of things going around on in your life that aren't going wrong, but we tend to only focus on the bad, which in some
That's
cases may
right.
actually make it even worse when it doesn't
It
have
does.
to be.
It
So,
does. Yeah.
so don't take the good things for granted, even if you are suffering in some parts of your life. Be grateful for what God's still allowing to go right in this moment. But suffering is all around us. So I get why it can be hard to stay positive, you know, not just for you. The news is constantly telling us about bad things. I
Mhm.
mean, we've all heard the expression, if it bleeds, it leads. You know what I mean? Like, that's just how news are, because more people like well, I shouldn't say like to, just are programmed to tune into the horrors rather than the pleasant.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is. You know, we see countless reports about starvation, illness, war, and lately, what happened in the great state of North Carolina because of the hurricane. The
Yes.
suffering going on there is
Yeah.
tremendous. But however, very interesting. I have seen a lot of testimonies. I've read a lot of articles. I've seen some videos. I have not heard too many people complain to God. In fact, I've heard great expressions of their faith.
Yeah. And I've heard that many turn to God.
Yes, and we're going
There.
to get into that too. But here, like a real quick example, there was a couple years ago, the nation of Australia, like the whole nation was on fire. It seemed like wildfires everywhere,
Yeah.
and a lot of people who claimed to be of the faith, they lost their faith. Yet a lot of people who were not part of the faith turned to the faith. It's weird how tragedy can cause that, right?
Yeah.
Tragedy weeds out the fakes.
Hmm.
It always has, and it always will. So while suffering um, can't be ignored, it can't be exaggerated. But also, in some cases, any explanation we give is not going to do. It just isn't.
No.
So, sometimes for some people, you're just gonna have to accept you're never going to reach them. They're never going to take what you say to heart. They're never gonna even believe it. In fact, that's why a lot of times when an atheist tells me to answer a question, I just tell them I can't tell you an answer. And they're like, "See, I told you." I said, "No, no, no. I can't tell you an answer. I have an answer, but I can't give it to you." And this stuns them. Like,
Mhm.
why not? I said, "Well, because you won't understand it. You aren't capable. You have to be a child of God or willing to become a child of God to understand this." Because here's a dirty little secret, and most people hate when I say this, but the Bible wasn't written for atheists.
No, that's right.
Throughout the entire Bible, that whole collection of writings, there
Mhm.
are only three that you could really use to try to evangelize people who are not part of the faith. And real quick, I'll just sort of go through it. The Torah was not written for atheists. The prophets, a certain extent, but that was to warn God's people what was going to happen if they didn't turn to Him. It's just I'm sorry, repent back to Him. It can include atheists because a lot of those prophecies have a global, global hardships. That's the worst way to explain this. My mind's drawing a blank, but a lot of those prophecies affect the whole world.
Mm-hmm.
So they will affect atheists, but they're written to God's people. The Psalms were actually written for God's people too. Proverbs maybe a little bit because of like the words of wisdom, but you're not going to convince me. The Songs of Solomon, Ecclesiastes, Job, they have atheists in mind. And let's go to the New Testament. I mean, the Gospels, Matthew was written to young Christians, but it's also very beneficial to Jewish Christians. John was written to seasoned Christians, actually, not new converts, and was not written to evangelize. Mark and Luke were actually written to unbelievers or geared towards them, and so was the book of Acts. But the rest of the New Testament was written to either churches or people
Yeah.
that were already part of the faith. So I tell atheists, I can't give you an answer unless you're willing to become a child of God. And then if they say they are, I said, okay, great. So you're willing to have the world turn on you, your entire family maybe turn on you, your friends no longer want to see you, people want to mock, insult, and kill you, and oh, by the way, you have to tell all these different groups, gays, transgenders, adulterers, stealers, robbers, that they have to repent and stop because that's not how God wants to live. If you're willing to do all that, I'll tell you the answer. And surprise, surprise, not a single one has ever told me that they're willing to do all that.
Yeah.
Because the road Jesus paved was not paved with gold and chocolate that doesn't make you fat when you eat it. It's just, that's not what He said. He said you will be hated, you'll be persecuted, and you'll be killed.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, when we go to evangelize, hey, join us, and the world will hate you, the world will persecute, and the world will kill you. Join us. That's kind of what we're telling them.
Welcome.
Welcome aboard.
Yeah.
The ship is going to be pretty rocky here, but that's why we must stress the end game. The end game is not this world. You see, the funny thing about atheists is everything that they wish God would do, He's going to.
Yeah.
Just not to this world.
Yeah.
Okay? He's going to end suffering one day.
Mm-hmm.
Just not in this world. He's written this earth off. That's why He's creating a new one.
Mm-hmm.
And that new one is not going to have the problem this one has. So it's so funny how everything they want Him to do, He is going to do.
Mm-hmm. On His time.
Exactly. And that's the part they don't get. Why doesn't He just do it now? Now, I'm not going to go into, what I say to them, but I have a great answer to them that just silences them. But I think I said it during another study, but one day I'll say it again. So anyway, if I had a quick, easy to understand one word answer to this question about why God allows suffering that needed no explanation, okay, none, just say the word and that's it, I would be giving you an answer the Bible does not. The Bible does not have a quick, easy answer to this question. So we must share what is given.
Yeah.
And until we are with God, until God reveals all things, if He does reveal all things, suffering will always be, to a certain extent, a mystery to some people as to why it happens. The answers I will give about these issues will most likely not go far enough for some people. But the thing is, the Bible itself doesn't go far enough for most people. Even those who believe question, why don't we know more? Yeah. Why didn't God add X, Y, and Z to the Bible? Like a lot of people wonder what happened between the time Isaac was actually born and the 13-year gap between him and Ishmael. Because I think Ishmael was 13 years old when Isaac was born. The Bible doesn't tell us a darn thing about it. The Bible also doesn't tell us anything about the early days of Adam and Eve. All we know is when it all went bad. We know they were created, but we know that Adam named the animals, but we don't know anything else. We don't know any conversations they had. We don't know what they did for fun together. We know nothing. So, in a lot of cases, the Bible doesn't go far enough for a lot of people about a lot of things. So we can only go as far as His word allows us to.
Yeah.
As long as you're willing to accept what His word limits us to. So anyway, when is this issue of suffering even a problem? Why is it even a problem? If you really think about it, for so much of the world, it's not, because they don't even question it. But why is it a problem for the children of God? Because it's really only a problem for us. So the issue is only a problem for those who actually believe three things about God. If anyone asks a question about why God allows suffering, and they truly want the answer, they usually mock those who believe the following. If you are someone who believes in one God, suffering becomes an issue. Suffering is not an issue if you are someone who believes in many gods, because clearly some gods are good and some gods are not.
Mm.
So some gods bless, some gods curse because they're evil, and some gods are good. So if you believe in one God, suffering is an issue that you have to deal with, especially when your library of all these different writings, because the Bible is not a book, it is a library of writings of books and letters, especially when that library calls your one God good and righteous numerous times, as well as love. So it's an issue for you.
Yeah.
You believe in one God who is described like that. In the areas of the world where they believe in multiple gods, there is no issue with suffering. The question's not really asked. The second thing that we have to contend with about the issue of suffering is if we say our God is almighty. We get asked the question, if your God is almighty, why doesn't he stop suffering?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if he's capable of doing it, why doesn't he? Because if he wasn't almighty, this wouldn't be an issue. He's just helpless. He can sympathize with us, but he can't do anything to help us. That's another problem we have, because we say not only is God good, righteous, just, and love, we say he's almighty, he's all powerful. So if he's all powerful, why doesn't he do anything? The third problem we face is, even though I already said it, but it's the Bible says God is love. It doesn't say he's hate. It doesn't say he's injustice. It says he's love.
Mm-hmm.
So
right.
if God is love and we're all his children, then why does he allow any of his children to suffer? Now, as you know from the things that I have said, we are not all his children. We are all his creation. And the kind of love that the New Testament speaks about is not the kind of love most people think it's teaching. It's a totally different kind of love. It's not a parental love. Jesus talks about this love, but the New Testament itself does not actually use the Greek word that would say parental love or a family kind of love. It doesn't.
Yeah.
So all those verses, for God so loved the world, God is love, nothing can separate us from the love of God. It's not talking about like a father to a child type of love. It's talking about a different kind of love.
That's right.
And I'll have to go over that in a different study, because I can't deviate here. It's already been 28 minutes. So here's the thing, though. Atheists are not wrong to ask these questions. They are a legit question.
They are, yeah. That's right.
If your God is love and just and righteous and good, then why is there suffering? So we better have an answer. So now we're going to get into the causes of suffering. Okay? First, no, of what not to say. What causes suffering? What not to say. All right. First, I want to go over that before we get into what to say. So, over the years, I have heard these types of answers, which I think are the wrong ones to give. The first one is that suffering is due to the world is not perfect. Now, we know the world is not perfect.
Mm-hmm.
But to say this implies God created an imperfect world, and we know that's not true, because if you read Genesis, he said everything was good.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, good in the Bible does not mean what we usually associate it with. Like, we say things like, that's a good dog, that's a good hamburger, it's a good movie, right? Things that bring us pleasure, we say, are good.
Mm-hmm.
When you see the word good in the Bible, God means perfect.
Yeah.
Okay?
Right.
So he created a world, and if you read Genesis 1, and God said it was good, and God said it was good, so God said it was perfect.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not the answer to give. All right? The answer is not God created an imperfect world, and that's why there is suffering in this world. The second answer not to give is ignorance. Now, I can see the merit in this argument. All right? Look at some of the oddball, idiotic things people do.
Mm-hmm.
Look at some terrible investments people make, and they lose everything and throw themselves off of the building tops because they don't want to go home and tell their spouses they lost everything. That happens.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Look at all the people that walk on the wild side and get hurt and killed for doing so.
Mhm.
You know, there's so many dumb things people do out of ignorance or just stupidity that cause suffering. But this too is not the answer to give, because it's not the biblical answer. The Bible doesn't say all of those who are ignorant will cause the world to suffer greatly. I have said it, the Lord. At least if there is a verse that says that, I don't remember it. So if
No,
there is one, go ahead and point it out. But I'm
no.
pretty sure the context would not be what most people would take it as. All right. Now, you could also say this is human ignorance. There is people starving in the world, yet we can send satellites to Mars.
Yeah.
You know, imagine how many millions. Heck, this is real ignorant. If we can send COVID vaccines to almost everyone upon the world in record time, then we can send food packages too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? I mean, we can send that needle to tribes in Africa, but yet we can't send like food.
That's right.
Right? It's the strangest thing.
Yeah.
We're gonna go over that later too. So I see the merit in saying ignorance, but now we need to start to go into what we do say. And before I get to that part of my outline where I really define it, I'm just going to sort of touch on it right now and saying there is a one word answer. It must be explained, but there is a one word answer. And that is this: all suffering is because of sin.
Mhm. Yeah.
This is the biblical position.
Mhm.
Suffering is caused by sin. Now, let me quickly explain before I start getting nasty emails and text messages. I'm not saying every time you sin, you will suffer. I'm not saying that the sins that you have committed, no matter what they are, directly lead to your life derailing to the point where it never gets back on the tracks.
Mhm.
It could, but I'm not saying that every time you sin, God's just going to take you right off those train tracks and throw you down a cliff either.
That's like over in some of these places where you get all these kids and that starving and they're just living in
Yeah,
horrible conditions and that. If
yeah,
you really look into what is going on in those countries and in those places, they are sacrificing children, they
yes.
worship
Oh,
Baal.
we're going to talk about that too.
Yeah,
We're actually closing in on that.
yeah.
But here's the thing, though. Job also teaches us something else, that you can suffer without being a very sinful person. And not just suffer, you can suffer tremendously not being a very sinful person. And I'm not going to say it yet, but we're going to get to it. All right. Just try. I know I keep on dropping this little teaser here of we're going to get to it, but we're going to get to it in probably like 10 minutes. So sin is the reason for all suffering, but whose sin? All right. So this actually needs to be broken up into three parts: your sin, the sin of others, and Satan's sin. So we're going to tackle this. Because they are the three sources of sin upon this world. The first is some suffering is because we sin, our
Mhm.
own sin. When you say this to a true child of God, most people don't usually object to that. They usually don't question it. True children of God understand if they sin, that sin may lead to suffering.
Mhm.
Actions have consequences, and people do tend to accept that. You shall reap what you sow.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you sow what you reap, right? This is actually a theme throughout the entire Bible. Okay? Whatever seeds you plant, it's going to come back to you later in life at some point. It might be quick, it might be not. As we talked about earlier with the older people and the youth, a lot of people who lived wrong in their youth pay for it later on in life. If you were a heavy drinker, if you were a smoker, if you were a drug user, if you were a gambler, eventually this stuff, for most people, catches up to you and
Mhm.
makes some part of your life have to endure suffering because of it. So most people accept that if you do commit certain types of sins and do certain things that are wrong that God told you not to, at some point your life is going to get harder because of it. Right? The second cause of suffering because of sin is the sins of others. War is a great example of this.
Mhm.
Look what's happening to the innocent people in Ukraine. Their entire towns are gone. They don't even have a place to take refuge. Right? Now, not everyone in Ukraine is guilty of whatever crimes in the world might actually think, or like, even in, like Russia, we know that these areas are very corrupt and a lot of bad things happen in them, but that doesn't mean the people themselves are directly a part of it.
That's right.
Right. But unfortunately, a lot of those people suffer the worst.
Yeah.
I don't see President Zelensky, in some, torn down building every day shouting fight on. He seems to be in a nice place, but yet the people that elected him are eating crumbs now and have no place to live.
Yeah. Sad. Yeah.
Even in Russia, like there have been towns in Russia that have been hit hard,
Yes.
and destroyed. It's not just one sided, but war is a great example of suffering. Drunk driving is another perfect example.
Yeah.
The suffering that can cause, oppression from tyrants, which you kind of touched on. Listen, I'm going to probably say this later, but our world produces enough food to feed everyone in the world 2.5 times over, and yet there's starvation because people in charge of certain areas are starving their people to death.
Yeah.
So the answer also includes the sins of others. Now, even Christians, if you sin, you might cause someone else to suffer. Now, how many Christians think about that? When you do something wrong, you might cause someone else to suffer.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of Christians do not think about that because they think that we are not going to cause anyone to suffer, when in reality we could. We are just as capable of committing the same types of sins as others. A Holy Spirit-filled Christian is less likely to do this stuff over time as they become sanctified, but early in your walk, or any point in your walk, listen, everyone falls off a horse at some point. Everyone slips getting on it at some point. Some of us slip when we walk in the front door. It's weird. And same here. So anyone is capable of, even a small sin can actually cause tremendous suffering for someone else. Now, I probably shouldn't say small sin, because sin is sin, but to what we would consider huge and small, not what God does. What we would say, well, that's not that bad. It shouldn't cause too much suffering. It might. Absolutely might. Now, here's 2 examples I really want to use to drive this home. And each one are going to be sexual sins, because sexual sins, as far as I'm concerned, perfectly illustrate how your own sin and how the sin of others can destroy your life.
Mm-hmm.
And, like it or not, besides for being fruitful, the creation of sex was not meant for unmarried people, and it could lead to, and more often does lead to, very serious issues in life and suffering because of it. How many women staring down the road of single motherhood?
Yeah.
Right? How many people end up with an STD? A couple of years ago, I read an article, 100 million Americans have an STD. 100 million. If that number is even remotely close to being true, that means if you're one of those cavalier people, you have a 1 in 3 chance every time you engage in sex before marriage of coming down with something.
Yeah.
Now, I guarantee you, there were a lot of souls in heaven that had AIDS on earth. But, what also does it do? I know this is stereotyping, but I stereotype because it's what I do. Because more often than not, it's true. Sex before marriage can psychologically affect women a lot more than men. It just does. Because a lot of women get psychologically destroyed when that man doesn't want a relationship with her.
Yeah.
And if it keeps happening, it can affect her much more than it does a man. I'm not saying it can't affect men either, but it's more likely to affect a woman.
Yeah.
Especially since most women instinctively, this is instinct, no. If they give themselves to a man in that way, they expect him to do the right thing if they end up pregnant. And we live in a world where that increasingly doesn't happen.
Yeah, that's right.
So they end up, in a situation where, they suffer to a certain degree because of their own sin. Now, again, I'm not judging them for it. I'm not. I'm just stating the facts. We have years of studies to show this. If you have a child out of wedlock, especially if you don't graduate high school, or even if you do, you are more likely to have a tougher time for the foreseeable future than if you did not.
Yeah.
Not always the case, but in most cases.
True. Yeah.
Now, the other sexual sin is this. I'm going to use an example of someone I knew personally many years ago. I know her personally, but I knew her many years ago. You, you know how back in college, like you see people of all ages there.
Mhm.
It's not just like 18 and 22-year-olds. Like you see like 60-year-olds too that just want to go back and get another degree. Blah, blah, blah. Well, in one of my classes, there was not an older woman, but she was in her late 40s. She was 49, and we had to do a couple projects together. It's blah blah blah. And I normally don't ask questions like this, but she was just really nice. She was very pretty still, and I was like, why is she not married? And so I just kind of nonchalantly geared a conversation to sort of be nosy. And she told me that she was married at one point. She and her high school sweetheart went to the same college, and when they graduated, I think she said they're like 23, and they got married, and a year later they got divorced because he cheated on her.
Mm.
And she said she never recovered. This was 25 years later. She suffered tremendously from that. The
Yeah.
trust that was broken, she never recovered from it. The actions of her ex-husband caused this woman a quarter century of suffering. And this was 20 something years ago
Yeah.
that I, found this out. So I cannot imagine if she's still suffering 20 something years later now. I hope she was able to find peace, and I hope she was able to forgive, but I would tend to think after 25 years, that's not as likely to happen. Still could, but not as likely.
Yeah.
So here are two prime examples of how suffering is caused by your personal sin
Yep.
and
Ab-
by the sin of another.
Yeah.
Drinking and drug use would also be one. If you will destroy your body at some point.
Yeah.
The body can only take so much. There are very few people that can drink for decades heavily or do drugs occasionally. Like here, right, there are people out there that can do heroin once a year and not have a problem. Don't know why, don't know how, but that's one out of every 10,000. So you're not going to be that one. Odds are you're going to be hooked, and within years you're going to be dead.
When I was working in nursing a few years, probably about 10, 12 years or so back, there was this gentleman that came in and he was kind of like losing his mind because he was a heavy drinker most of his life.
Mm,
And he was in his 60s, I think. And
not very old.
he would take his fingers and just pick the skin off of himself.
Ugh,
He says, because he felt his skin was crawling all the time where alcohol had his
ugh.
nerves so disturbed. Yeah, it was bad.
Well, one of my ex girlfriends from years ago, her uncle died of wet brain. He drank himself to the point where his brain just became literal mush.
Mm.
Which, to do that,
Yeah.
I've heard that's hard to do. Like most people get cirrhosis of the liver before they get that.
Yeah.
Like that is like I don't know how common it is amongst bad alcoholics, but I know it happens, and that I heard the brutal way to go. But that takes a tremendous amount of drinking. One of my father's friends, who actually died 30 years ago, for 20 years he drank a 24 pack of Bud and a whole bottle of Jack Daniels every day for 20 years. And my father asked him how he was doing with it one day, and he said, "Well, I was humming right along until my pancreas exploded."
Oh man.
And he said, "You don't know pain. Do you know that?" And I was like, "Yeah, I would have to imagine there's not too many things more painful than that."
No.
And he died a couple years later. And I was young when he died. Like I did know him from like time that I was a young kid. And my last image of him in my mind, which is burned into my mind, I think I was 11 or I was 10. And I just remember seeing him on a chair because he didn't have any strength left. His legs were literally this, like,
Yeah.
wide now. That's what was left of his leg. I mean, a normal man's leg at the age of 47 is not this
Yeah.
big. You know, it was literally bone. That's all left of him, and he died a couple of days later or something, or like a week or two later. But that's the last thing I remember. That's the last time I saw him.
Yeah.
I was very young. I think I was like 10 or 11. Maybe even younger. Like I was not very old at that point. So, but anyway, now to the next cause of suffering, and that is Satan and his kingdom. Okay, we know that this world, besides for just people doing bad things to themselves and you know having to deal with others doing insane things that cause suffering, but there's also Satan. This world also has earthquakes and tsunamis and violent storms. All right. They are related to the first two parts because we aren't the only people, aren't the only beings that have sinned. Satan
Yes.
has sinned. The angels have some angels have sinned. And because of this, they bring the suffering from their sin down to this world because this world was cursed because of it. Because of Satan's sin of temptation being brought into the world was cursed, and now the world operates in a way it wasn't supposed to. And the world has things down here, two kingdoms, as we're going to talk about very, very soon, it was never supposed to have. In fact, you could say that the suffering from sin is on kind of an overload because we have angels who continue to sin down here as well, demons, right? So it's not just us who sinned. And by the way, I'm not saying every hurricane and every tornado and every earthquake is caused by Satan. Some of these, I do believe, are judgment from God.
Yes.
Especially when you really look at the areas that were hit, like here already. Apparently, the last two hurricanes strike Florida hit right where Scientology has a major headquarters or something.
Really?
Yeah, very interesting. You know, Scientology. You know, who would have thought God would punish them, right?
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure one of them will show up at my house now one day because that's what these people do. They're intimidators, but you know, oh well. I will. I will treat them the way I treat the Jehovah's. I will just
In scripture.
educate them on everything they
Yeah,
don't know.
that's right.
I actually follow them down the driveway and down the street.
Really?
No, they can't wait to get away from me, and I don't want them to. Oh
Uh,
yeah, the ones that engage with me within 5 minutes. You know what? It's been nice talking to you. No, I'm not done talking to you. Like what? I said no. We need to talk. And they're like, why? I said, because you're very wrong, and you're in danger. Oh no, we're okay. No, you're not. And as they walk away, I follow them. My mom would say to me, why do you give these people a time of day? Like she was mad at me one day, like 15 years ago, and so I've been this annoying for a long time. So they don't ever think I haven't been, all right? But I finally said to her, Mom, you know, it's not why I do. It's the real question is why you don't. These people may never encounter another Christian home ever, especially in New York. Okay, of someone who can tell them the truth, and yet you just get mad at them and send them away like they're some type of parasite.
yeah.
Never forget, their souls are just as important as yours.
Yes, that's
So,
true.
so follow them to their car, telling them the truth, and as they're driving away from you, spinning the tires, yell it. Because you never know what might actually. This one woman, her name was Catherine, I'll never forget it. She kept coming back. Every time she came back, she brought someone else. Usually it was a taller and taller man with a deeper and deeper voice. And the moment they said something wrong, I corrected them and they didn't say another word. But she kept talking to me. And I actually wanted her to keep coming back because I was getting her to question things.
Yeah, planting
And
seed.
then all of a sudden, I stopped seeing her.
Uh,
They got to her and said, "Don't come back." You see, because here's the thing: the Dixon side of my family were Jehovah's Witnesses, so I know how these people really operate. My father wasn't. Okay, he rejected that from a young age, but the rest of his family were. Hence why growing up, my mother kept us away from them as much as possible. But it was the funniest thing though, because the one thing that they would do, and this is a big no-no in the Jehovah community here, you don't celebrate holidays.
no.
But they would do Thanksgiving with us. And it's funny because my aunts and my uncles would always say it like this: "We hoped you enjoyed your holiday at our family dinner."
No.
They used the occasion to get everyone in the same house, but they didn't consider it a Thanksgiving dinner. They just happened to have turkey and stuffing, mashed potatoes, rolls, and vegetables, and everything else. but it was for us because it was our holiday. They
Mhm.
just had dinner. We had the holiday. It's interesting how they would say things like that to us. In
Yeah.
fact, many years later, one of my aunts, one of the last times I saw her, like she even still alluded to that, how it was our holiday, just their family dinner. I'm like, hey, whatever you want to say, so that way they don't throw you out of that Kingdom Hall. I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
So here's the whole thing, though. If there is a very real devil who can do these things to the world, because the devil is real, then that means we have to blame his sin for some of the sufferings that we see throughout this world. This is not a cop out. This is not making him a scapegoat. The Bible makes it clear that Satan has sinned and his sin affects the whole world. In fact, who's to say Satan didn't go to God one day and said, listen, it's one thing about me trying to get Job to turn on you, but man, if you let me do a major disaster to, like let's say Japan or America, oh, I'll get a lot of people to curse you. And God goes, okay, what do you want to do? And he says, let me control the weather. Teach me how. And then Satan whispers it into the ears of evil people, and they come up with machines that we now are starting to hear more and more about that can create these storms and guide them. And Satan wants to do because Western North Carolina, as far as I've always been told, is a very religious area of the Bible Belt. And who's to say Satan, because what that hurricane did was basically a tropical storm, dumped more water than anyone's ever seen.
Crazy.
And wiped out so much. But yet, we don't hear people cursing God, do we? So who's to say God doesn't take that same kind of bet with Satan and let him do other things around the world in other ways? Who's to say God didn't say, okay, you can create diseases, and I'll show you people won't curse me? Who's to say it doesn't still happen? I'm not saying it does. I'm saying who's to say it doesn't?
Yeah.
God removes that hedge, allows Satan to do what he wants, and who say Satan doesn't dispatch his followers, his fallen angels to carry out a lot of these things, which I think he does. Because they're all led by him. So, so his sin is causing sort of an overflow of sin in the world. And Jesus actually kind of confirmed this when he talked about the woman who was brought to him who had been what? Suffering for many years. She was bound by Satan.
Mm-hmm.
Job, going back to his book, his suffering was caused by Satan. God permitted it. Right? Now, here's the thing. Once you see the world this way, it becomes very clear. There are two kingdoms on this world, God's and Satan's. And you can see it on full display.
Yeah.
When you see a true Christian start making their way up certain ranks, you see the news, you see entertainment, you see the government, you see churches, you see the courts try to stop them and tear them down because they're not part of their kingdom. You see, Satan's kingdom has a lot. It's got education, it's got the news, it's got entertainment, it's got courts, it's got governments, it's got everything. He planted his people everywhere he needed to run this world the way he wants it.
Yeah.
And when God's kingdom starts to win, look at the outcry when Roe versus Wade was overturned.
Mm-hmm.
Satan's kingdom, it really suffered a major defeat.
Yeah.
God's kingdom got a major victory. Look at how they're responding. Right?
Yeah.
No surprise to me that with a couple of years of states passing laws that were allowing abortion up to birth, God said, okay, it's been the 50-year jubilee of Roe versus Wade. We're getting rid of it. We're going to begin to restore life now. You've gone too far with it. You've already murdered 60 million babies in the womb or somewhere around that number. Mm-hmm. Now you're going to start murdering them as they're on their way out. We're going to overturn this.
Yeah.
Okay? So, there are two kingdoms at work, and God's kingdom is here right now. Not here physically, but you can enter it. You can become part of it. You can represent it. You can try and grow it. Okay? His physical kingdom comes later with the new earth and the new Jerusalem. Actually, it really comes on this world when Jesus rules for 1,000 years, but then we get the eternity part of his kingdom with the new earth and the new Jerusalem. But, listen, when when Jesus said the kingdom of God is at hand, what he meant was you can reach out and grab it now. Like, at hand doesn't mean in the future. It means like right in front of you.
Yeah.
Like right now, my iPad is at hand that I'm looking at
Mhm.
doing this study. I can touch it. If I do, it will fall over, so I won't, but it's right there. You know, that's what at hand means. So now we're going to go into the question a little bit more about why God allows suffering, right? So we kind of touched on some things, so I'm probably going to repeat a few things and try to dive into it more, but I want to actually break this also down into three areas, you know. Why does God allow me to suffer for my own sins? Why does he allow us to suffer because of the sins of others? And why do we suffer because of the sins of Satan, right? So a different answer to a certain extent is now needed for each of these questions. So let's get to it. First, why we suffer if we sin. The answer is God will discipline us. Hebrews, Proverbs, and Revelation all tell us this. God will discipline his children. In fact, he ain't disciplining you, worry. If you mess up constantly, you never feel conviction, you never get disciplined, worry. Because a parent will discipline their children. Unless they're only 3 and 4 and you're told by your wife no. So you have to just let your 4-year-old hit you every time you tell him no. It's great, you know? You can threaten timeout, but you can't actually put him in it. Lovely, right? Oh, we're setting our kids up to be the most best angels when they're old, you know? But anyway, discipline is one way God teaches us. It's one of the ways he tries to reach us. Sometimes, too, pain can be a great teacher, you know. If you do something stupid and you end up hurt, well, you're less likely to do it again.
Yeah.
Unless you're a man, because we tend to do it twice just to make sure it actually did hurt the first time. Like, for example, whenever the waitress comes over and says, "Don't touch the plate, it's hot," I'm like, well, now I'm touching it.
Mhm.
I don't believe you. I see you holding it. Why can't I? So I don't actually touch it. I've already learned that lesson twice in my teenage years, believe her. So anyway, God could be punishing us to try and teach us a valuable lesson. Maybe that's why we're suffering, because of the sins we're committing. If we were not punished for committing sin, if no one was ever punished for committing sin, can you imagine what this world would look like? Look what it looks like now when we are.
Yeah.
Imagine if there was never any consequences for people doing wrong to others or to themselves.
Oh, yeah.
I don't even want to think about what this world would actually be like. You know, years ago in Canada, actually, like, you know, probably decades ago now, I believe it was the Montreal Police Department went on strike.
Mhm.
Granted, murders and rapes and armed robberies didn't skyrocket, but, you know, people were, you know, running stop signs, running red lights. Some
Yeah.
people got hit because of this. A couple stores were, in fact, looted.
Mhm.
You know, it didn't totally descend into anarchy, but it was heading that way.
Yeah.
It was only a matter of time.
Well, I mean, people, just citizens take things in their own hands, and that could get pretty bad, right?
Whenever mankind takes things into their own hand, it never works out good for anybody.
Yeah.
It just never has. I mean, right back in the Garden of Eden to basically the last day of the tribulation, when mankind does this, it's never going to work out good.
Yeah.
So why does God allow us to suffer because of sins of someone else? Now, this question is a bit deeper. But if we give it some thought and we ask the Spirit for wisdom, we can see why. And I don't really need my notes for this one because I know how to explain it without even glancing over. So I'm just going to skip down to the next page and I'm just going to go over it. All right. When God created us, he wanted a family. We were created for his pleasure because he wanted a family. He had Jesus. He wanted more. And so if you're going to be a family and you're going to give that family free will, then you have to let them live amongst each other because you want them to learn how to love and grow together and have fun together and create lives together. Be a family. But when you do this, you run the risk of them hurting each other and being mean and nasty to each other. Every parent in the world, okay, if they really wanted their home to be peaceful at all times, they just keep their kids separated. They never fight. You could go visit them in their rooms individually, but you never let them actually see each other, because then there's never any conflict. Now, would any parent do that?
No.
Yeah, exactly. No.
Well,
All right. Maybe there's a few. But in general,
yes.
most parents would never do that, because that's not a family. Okay? So, God wanted a family. And to do that, he had to let us live amongst each other, interacting with each other. And he had to run the risk of us not always being nice to each other. Mm-hmm. Because I heard Frank Turks say once, when he was kind of answering this question, but it was like a different question, to where it was kind of related to it, to where he had said, like, maybe the only way that God could get the family what he wanted was to give us free will, to allow people to reject him, because he'd get so many that wouldn't. Because if you don't give us free will, and you don't give us the chance to do good or the chance to do evil, then you really haven't created a family. You've created just drones. Yeah. That just, slaves, kind of. They just do what they're told without any question. They have no minds. They have no souls. There's nothing to have a family with them about. So, God wanted us to be a family. He wanted a family. And unfortunately, he had to run the risk of us hurting each other. Boom. Now for the big question. Why does God allow suffering? Because of Satan. And I'm just going to say this. Part of this answer is we may never fully know until we're glorified and we're with him. Mm-hmm. But the other part is, and this is not going to suffice for a lot of people, I'm just going to say it right now. The other part is, God knows why. And honestly, that's good enough for me. If he allowed Satan to send that hurricane to North Carolina, or let's say he has one come up the coast and it nails Connecticut, I may never know why. Well, I mean, I kind of know why here, but there's a little bit different. But, honestly, God knows. And that's good enough for me. I don't need to know. Mm-hmm. I trust God. But I know enough about him to have my theories and ideas as to why he allowed Satan to do something, based on the Bible, based on Job. But any suffering I experience at the hands of my hedge being removed, I may never know, and I'm okay with that. I have to be, because the Bible doesn't really dive into this to the point where you can say, well, that's my example. Yeah. Maybe for some people, yeah, but not for everyone. Mm. I may have to wait until I'm about to enter paradise. Yeah. And I'm okay with it. In fact, maybe I don't want to know how terrible and awful I truly was, and that's why God allowed Satan to do it. To sort of snap me out of it, to get me back where I needed to be. Mm. Suffering can actually also be a good thing. Oh, I bet no one thought I was going to go there. But it can. There was a man who ended up with polio. Successful man, businessman, wealthy man. Ended up bedridden for the last part of his life. You know what he said? I spent my whole life never looking up. Now I'll spend the rest of it looking up, and I've grown closer to God. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Fantastic way to see it. What a fantastic way to see it. Yeah. I spent my whole life never looking up. Now I'll spend the rest of it staring up. Yeah. There was, I forgot when I heard this testimony, but there was a lady who smoked for years, and she ended up with lung cancer, and she said, I'm going to suffer as I die, but you know what? I'm grateful now that God gave me lungs to breathe, and I regret destroying them. Yeah. But you know what? It took that for her to be grateful for what he gave her. Yeah, absolutely. There are some people that when they suffer, they see it as, well, listen, here's a great example. Paul suffered more than anyone, if you really want to think about it. Mm-hmm. Paul, when he became a Christian, traveled around by foot, town to town, was hated, rejected, spit on, mocked on, stoned, shipwrecked, left for dead, right? Yeah. And yet, you know what his response? Oh, and he was impoverished. And he said, you know what? I have lived life with a lot. I've lived life with nothing. I can do all things through Christ. And I count it as all joy. Mm-hmm. I get to suffer the way he did. I get to suffer the way my Lord did. he was joyful with it, which is part of the next Bible study that I have with suffering, how to prepare and how to deal with suffering a little bit more. One of the ways is to embrace it.
Yeah.
Okay, you sent it this way. And you know what you can also say, and this is sometimes what I say to people. I say to myself. I don't say it as often as I should, but I say to myself, you know what? I'm glad I'm going through this and someone else isn't, because I can get through it.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of times, listen, I'm not going to reveal too much about personal prayers for others, but there have been times that I have prayed for people who had like a hurt shoulder, or who had like, like a hurt area from like, having like a procedure.
Mm.
And I have asked God to give me their pain so I can suffer. And I hear from them later on that after I prayed for them, their pain went away. But all of a sudden, I had to deal with pain in that exact area for a couple of days.
Yeah.
Out of nowhere.
That can certainly happen. Yeah.
Because I knew I could handle it better. A lot of times, if I see Ashley hurting, I will basically pray to take her pain. Let me suffer through it.
Mm.
I can deal. A lot of times she has a harder time because of things that happened to her years ago. So give it to me. And she rarely ever suffers.
Mm-hmm.
I ask this quite a bit. If there's ever any reason she's going to, if as long as you approve it, let it happen to me instead.
Mm.
And believe it or not, there's a lot of times where all of a sudden something like not too pleasant actually does happen. Like I said, I've never suffered the way others have, but I've endured troubled waters. And a
Yeah.
lot of those troubled waters I probably brought on myself by asking me to go through them so someone else didn't have to.
Mm.
Like that's just what it is. Um, um, there was another woman who gave a brilliant testimony about her suffering. She was going blind later on in her life, and she asked, and she was asked, "Why aren't you upset over this?" And she said, "Because God's putting the finishing touches on my character, and I have to suffer to let Him do it."
Yeah.
I mean, these are people
Yeah.
who are children of God.
Yes.
This is how you react,
Yeah.
right? Now, there are some people who could never, some people who will never understand that or accept it, just the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
There are some people who will never be like Job or be like Paul. They will never be able to understand the suffering. But here's the thing, though. Job's book was written thousands of years ago, and it still speaks to us today. It can still teach us today
Yes.
about suffering.
Yeah.
Maybe God's just trying to show Satan that it's not just Job that loved him for him.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other people that love him, regardless of what he does for them. Regardless of that head she had on him for however many years or however many decades. Okay? Okay? Just remember, Job had his wealth and his health and his friends and everything taken from him, yet he never cursed God. He
Sure.
cursed everything else.
Yeah.
He cursed the day he was born.
Yeah. Yeah.
He didn't curse God. Yeah. And, and through most of human history now, God can point to that example. How at least one man loved him for him, and not because God blessed him. We should all try to be number 2,
Mm-hmm.
and number 3, and number 4, and number 8 billion. I don't think that's ever going to happen. Job struggled until he reached to a point where he understood that there was a reason for God letting him to go through this, then he no longer needed to know it. All of a sudden, Job's struggle was over.
Yeah.
When you accept something, a lot of times the power that something had over you is gone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or it's weakened.
Yeah.
And by the way, something God doesn't like? Complaining.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
He likes praising.
Yeah.
And God doesn't like to hear why. Job asked why. And God told him, "Who are you to question me?"
Mm-hmm.
So when you're suffering, remember, you ask him why, you might be told the same thing. So I have a couple more things to say. So we're going to bring it home.
Okay.
How Christians and non-Christians look at suffering and how we should. we're already kind of alluding to it, but let's just sort of go into it. The Christian looks at the problem of suffering in certain ways, and so do non-Christians, right?
Mhm.
Um, but here's how we should look at it, right? First, the suffering in the next life. The Bible makes it clear people who are not children of God, they will suffer more in the next life than they ever did in this one,
Mhm.
right? So for those who are not Christians, suffering is a much bigger deal because it seems larger and almost unending. In fact, when, you know, a lot of people, you know, I hate to say this, but this happens. There are a lot of Christians in life that seem to suffer most of it, and a lot of non-Christians that seem to never suffer, and they seem to die with peace in their hearts. But I assure you, when that heart took its last beat, they no longer had peace.
Yeah.
How many times we hear at funerals, well, they're in a better place.
Yeah, I know.
You know,
Yeah.
it takes every ounce of my teeth threatening to bite through my tongue to not say anything. Yeah, I just I just want to bite my tongue, but at the same time, the last thing you want to do to people crying over someone they love dying is going, by the way, they're probably in hell.
Yeah.
That's the last thing you want to say to someone. That's
Yeah.
definitely not going to make them want to join your faith. So
That's
you
right.
have to just sort of like bite the bullet and wait till they're in a better situation to start teaching them, then let them come to that conclusion themselves. I've had people tell me, now that I'm n- now that I am a part of the faith, I think about people that I used to know, and I'm kind of worried about them.
Yes. Yeah.
And I basically say to them, well, listen, if there was any reason for God to show them mercy, I promise you He did. But let's just make sure you don't join them
Hmm.
in case He didn't. So I am of the belief. Now again, I'm not even going to hide this. The Bible does not say this,
Hmm.
but I'm of the belief, based on what it does say. This is an inference. I could be wrong. No one has to agree with me. But there are two main schools of thought that I've heard about how God deals with our memories. He either heals them so the people that we used to love that we know are not with us for eternity, it doesn't bother us, or He erases them from our memories. I tend to favor the second. If anyone I cared about is not with me, I'm not going to remember them. Because how could you enjoy eternity knowing that, like, your brother or your aunt is in the lake of fire? There is no possible way you can do that unless He has a way to just heal your memory where it doesn't bother you no more. Maybe He does, but
We're filled with too much joy to even realize. Maybe.
that actually could also be it, to where we're just so in awe by what we do have that we don't even think about what we used to have. But listen, it. I'm of the belief that if He does anything, He just cleans the memory clean, like He just wipes it clean. If He does anything, I'm not saying He does. Maybe it's just so beautiful that we don't even think about. We don't even think about what we used to have. It could also be that too. One day we'll find out. But you see, for the Christian, it's very different because we know suffering in this world ends because we're going into the next one. So when you see it that way, suffering for us becomes much smaller in scale because it's not just a lifetime and then we're done. It's a whole eternity afterward of none.
Mm.
So where for the unbeliever, it's just I suffer now and then I don't exist no more. For us, it'll probably be kind of like a bad dream.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
like we have some pretty. I've had some pretty unique bad dreams in my life that I'm not going to go into. But listen, Paul said, said something to the effect of, for this momentary affliction is preparing us for the eternal way to glory beyond all comparison. So Paul is basically saying, not even worth complaining about the suffering here,
Mm.
because our lives, if you think about it, are nothing more than a puff of smoke. We're
Yes.
here and we're gone.
Yeah.
Like literally, we're here and we're gone. Our
Hmm.
lives are a puff of smoke. But what we do in
That's
that
right.
little puff,
So our life is like a vapor, right?
yeah, exactly. It's here, it's gone.
Hmm.
Listen, there are people that lived hundreds of years ago, still dead, still gone. there are countless people that just sort of faded into history. You know, they're here, they're gone, we're going to join them. But our souls, on the other hand, you see, our fleshly body, it's here, it's gone. This life is but a puff of smoke, but the one that counts. I shouldn't say one that counts, because this one counts too, but man, the one after,
Yeah.
that's unending.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said to someone years ago who said, "Do you really believe in all that?" I said, "Yeah." For some people, it's going to be an unending paradise of joy and love and peace.
Yeah.
And for some, it's going to be an unending nightmare.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
To where the worst of the worst will happen. So, when you compare the moments of suffering to eternity in paradise, they all of a sudden don't really seem to have the same weight. Which, by the way, I too am guilty of not doing. Like, you know, there are certain things that I still have to control my getting set off by.
Mm-hmm.
It's,
Yeah.
and I'm getting better at some of them. There are still some that I fail at, like traffic. I still lose it. But I'm getting. But it's the stupid things.
Yeah.
Nothing major. It's the dumb things that I still have to work on. So basically, God took the big stuff. He got that out of my heart, and now I get tested a lot with this one, and I starting to get a little better with it here. So But here's the thing, though: if you don't believe in eternity after this life, you don't have the hope we have. Christians have hope.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, hope is such a powerful, beautiful part of our faith that others don't have.
No. That's right.
Hope is the anchor that holds you firm when that huge wave comes. Hope is the rudder that gets you through the storm. Okay,
Yeah.
Jesus is our hope. When He comes back, storm's over. There ain't never gonna be another storm. It's over.
That's right.
That's
Sooner.
hope. Right? God shall wipe away all our tears. There shall be no sorrow, be no pardon, be no death, for the former things that passed away. Revelation 21. What became chapter 21. Right? So many Christians, when they suffer at the end of their lives, see it as something they only have to endure a short time because they're reaching the end of their race. In fact, if you really think about it, in the weight of eternity, the moment you're born, you're already at the end of your race. If you really think about it, I mean, even if you live 80 years, what's 80 years when you count it against eternity?
Yeah.
It's nothing. It's
right.
absolutely nothing. So, all right, let's wrap this up. Let me just get to the last page of my outline. Here we go. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
Ready to bring it home?
Sure. Let's go for it.
All right. Now watch all of a sudden like my name be screamed and I have to run upstairs real quick. So, all right. There could be many reasons for all the different kinds of suffering. And I'm speaking for myself here. I'm at peace with them. Because like Job, I know I worship a God who is righteous and everything he does is right. So if God allows me to suffer for any reason, it is the right thing to happen, and it is most likely the best thing that could have happened to me. For Job, it was. His faith grew so strong that God blessed him twofold, right? He gave more than he had before. But one day, I truly believe I will understand why God allowed everything to happen to us, why he allowed it. So instead of asking God why, instead of pleading and begging for an answer that most likely will not be given, we should say, Lord, Abba, here is my suffering. I do not question you. I do not question why I'm going through this. I will just trust you have a righteous reason for allowing it. So honestly, maybe that is the quick, simple answer to this question after all.
Yeah.
At least for some situations.
Mm-hmm.
For some people. There's some people who will never see that as an answer. But maybe God allows us to suffer just so we can grow in our faith and become closer to him.
Yeah.
Maybe if we start to wander too much down the road of it's I instead of he,
Mm-hmm.
something's going to happen to start reeling us back in.
We get complacent too. Yeah.
Maybe he still wants to show that when others intend evil, he can still do good, just like he did with Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
Never forget what happened to Joseph, too. I mean, we talk about Job. What about Joseph? His brothers turned on him. He was sold into slavery. Okay, he was put in prison, but then he became the second most powerful man in Egypt.
And even he recognized that it was the work of God that allowed
He did. Brilliant point. Even I wasn't going to say that. Brilliant.
that.
He did. He said, yeah, he understood that God prepared him all on the way to get him to be the second in command of Pharaoh.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, and this is another Bible study, but his relationship to Pharaoh was very similar to the father and Jesus relationship.
Mm.
And Joseph was also called the savior of his people too, because he saved Israel from the famine.
Yeah.
That's another study. But
Yeah.
Joseph suffered too, big
Yes.
time.
Yeah.
Um, Jacob is another example of his own sins causing himself to suffer. Jacob was a deceiver.
Yes.
And Jacob himself was deceived badly because when he got married, he woke up, he was next to the wrong woman.
Yeah.
He
Right.
wanted Rachel, and behold, Leah. I mean, that's one of the funniest verses in any book ever.
Yeah.
The man on his wedding night got drunk and woke up next to he married the wrong woman. Like, if that was in a movie, we'd laugh.
Hmm.
If that happened to someone we didn't like, we'd laugh.
Yeah. Right.
Like, dude, you married the wrong woman. I'll never stop laughing at this. That happened to Jacob. Why? Because Jacob was a deceiver and he reaped what he sowed. He too was deceived.
Yeah.
Don't ever think you don't reap what you sow.
Yeah. You will.
You do.
Yeah.
No matter what it is. I will tell a quick personal story here, and then I'll say my last two lines, and then we're done. But 16 years ago, or maybe almost 18 years ago, I was a different person back then. I was a Christian, but I was in my infancy, and I still had no problems telling people off when they crossed a line with me. And I told this one woman off, and I brought her 4-year-old daughter into it because she wasn't potty trained yet. And I said, so is there something wrong with her, or are you just lazy? So why is your daughter still, not in diapers? And I only said it to be mean and nasty because she really got me angry.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to add on to how I was basically telling her off. And well, the darndest thing happened because now over the summer, people began to ask, so when are you going to start potty training Jace? And we were starting to think about it. And then the Holy Spirit told me, he's not going to be potty trained until after he's 4. And I was like, why? And then the Holy Spirit reminded me of what I said to this woman all those years ago. He said, you sowed it, you will reap it.
Aww.
And Jace just turned 4 on September 27th. So he's still not potty trained. And when I tried over the summer, I got no help. And he really had zero interest. Like nothing I've ever seen. And I then knew for sure that I was now going to have to reap this. And the Holy Spirit said something to me. People will say to you what you said to her. And I've had people say, so is there something wrong with him, or are you and your wife just not caring?
Mm.
You will reap what you sow.
You will.
I'm reaping this almost 2 decades later.
Mm.
Now, again, it's not the worst thing in the world, but, it's still something. So you'll reap what you sow, and that sowing and that reaping could cause suffering at some point.
Yeah.
But anyway, maybe some of this suffering is to sort of be like Joseph and to be like Job and to be like Paul, to where you get to the point where you learn in all situations to embrace, to count it as all joy, and to trust our righteous God, who does no wrong, has your best interest at heart.
Mm-hmm.
I know only true children of God could ever one day understand that.
Yeah.
And that's all whoever will. Amen. So there it is.
That's right.
Why does God allow suffering? Why do we suffer? I think I went through pretty much every sort of angle on it as best I could. I tried not to repeat myself too much. And as I said, thank goodness I looked at this outline before tonight, because I had to rework most of it. I know why your internet went out, because
Oh my goodness, that was crazy.
I'm just going to say this flat out. If we did this on Friday, this would have been a disaster.
No, well, there you go. Lord was after us.
As I was reading what I had done, it was clearly, I never proofread it. I just said save and I'll come back to it. I never went back to it. So I had it basically took me 2 hours to go through the whole thing and analyze every line as to why I said what I said. So
Oh, you had to
But
make
no, I think it was much better tonight than it would have been. So
Yes.
anyway, that
It
is
was
that. Maybe if Avery stays asleep by herself, I could sneak down here one night and we could do like half-hour ones. Maybe I can just sort of
yeah.
blast out half an outline and then do the other half. But we'll see. Normally when she's asleep, she's asleep. But once in a while, when I go back up there, she's like sitting straight up, looking like this. I'm like, Avery, and and she'll just look at me and go, "Where were you?" I'm like, I was downstairs, but I came right back. But she doesn't seem to get the time yet. She just knows I wasn't there.
Yeah.
She doesn't know I was gone for 90 minutes. She's not. No, I wasn't there. Listen, like, I get it now. I get it. My dad told me that whenever I slept in the bed, my heel was right in his throat or right in the center of his back. And I get it, because now I get her elbow and she does 360s in her sleep. It's the weirdest thing.
Oh, I have a grandkid, Avery. Same thing. Just like
The
a fish.
weirdest thing.
Oh,
I used, you know, listen, I am not the best sleeper. I actually will tell you horror stories about what I'm like. All right.
really? Yeah.
But I at least stay mostly in one spot. I might have full-blown conversations in my sleep. I might cry in my sleep. I might sleep on my arm wrong, jump up like a lunatic, and run around because I'm insisting my arm is gone, and almost give her a heart attack because she thinks I'm actually being attacked. Done that a few times.
Oh my goodness.
I even told her once when she said, "Shut up and come to bed." I said, "You don't know what pain is," and she's like, "I gave birth." I'm like, "Oh yeah, you did." I'm like, "But you got the epidural." She's like, "Just shut up and come to bed." I'm like, "Okay, I can't. My arms are gone." She's like, "Your arm's not gone." So I'm not easy to sleep with, but like Avery does like 360s.
Yeah.
And it's just
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't even know how she gets over me sometimes. She'll literally like, I'll actually wake up and she's laying across my bed with her head off the bed.
Yeah.
One night I actually woke up just as she was going. I caught her.
Oh wow.
And
Yeah.
it was like, put her back. I'm like, okay, time to get the bungee cords and bungee this kid down.
Oh my goodness. This can be scary, right?
It's so weird because when you become a parent, you begin to see, you begin to like see why your parents feared certain things. Like when I see my kids jumping on the couch and I see them falling back and not falling off but almost falling off. I see my son jump and land on his head and laugh. It's like, I'm like, "Oh, Grappy's going," like,
Yeah.
okay.
Oh, I know it's bad. And you feel
Avery one time was on a chair and her grandpa was sitting right in front of her and I was right behind her and she just leaped. I caught her in midair.
wow.
And the funniest thing is her upper body didn't slump down, and I was like, "How is she levitating?" Because I caught her by her waist. Thought for sure she's gonna slam her head right down on the chair,
Yeah.
but he picked up his feet and he actually caught her chest while I held her, and I couldn't see that, and I was like, my heart was like racing. I was like, "Oh my gosh!" And then like the best thing was when like we have like this play thing outside, and I decided to climb up over a certain part because I'm too big for it, but they wanted me to go down the slide. And I turn around and they're now climbing up over it. And I was like, holy crap. I had to race back over there and like stand there in case they fell because it was like a 5-foot fall. I'm like, I'm never going to be able to explain this one to Ashley. I'm like, I don't know how they got that welt on their heads. The weirdest thing,
Oh, I know. And they have no fear. It's like they have no fear. They don't care.
No. They haven't learned yet from pain. As we talked earlier, pain causes suffering that you can learn from.
Yeah.
I now learn the hard way that, they will mimic what you do.
Mm-hmm.
Every single thing that you don't want them to do, they will do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They don't mimic sweeping up the floor yet. But
no.
They don't mimic cleaning the dishes or anything. But they do mimic washing their hands. And now the girls just want to wash their hands every second of the day. Yeah. They think their hands are dirty all the time now.
Yeah.
And they like go push the chair over and they stand up on it and they wash their hands. And I'm like, oh boy. Now can you at least push the chair back? I mean, you push it all the way over there, So, but anyway, that was it. That's the suffering study. Maybe
Okay.
the next one we'll do is the armor of God, because that got the second most votes.
Yes.
That got like 5 votes.
Mm-hmm.
This one got like 12, or like, no, this one got 11.
All right.
Destroyed it. It's great. So,
Yep.
so the armor of God shall be next, but then I do want to do Salt and Light. Salt and Light was one of the most fun outlines I've ever put together.
Yeah.
Like, I really enjoyed that one. I think I did it 3 years ago. So eventually I do want to do that one. And we still got to finish Revelation, and we will.
Yes.
We will finish that one because there's a lot to talk about with the book of Revelation, and we will definitely get to that one. So anyway, everyone who actually joined us and who may ever see this, have a great night, and you do as well, and keep that internet on.
Yes. All right, JC. Take care.
See you later.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
You're welcome. You have a good night.